The laughter came sharp and careless, cutting through the bright morning air like broken glass, and for a moment, it felt louder than the pounding in his chest. They didn't even try to hide it. A group of men, towering, sculpted, confident, stood near the edge of the training field, smirking as they watched him step forward. And in their eyes, he wasn't competition. He was a joke. If you believe in kindness and second chances, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel Echoes the Stories. Stories like this remind us that strength isn't always what it looks like. Rafiq Haleem adjusted the worn strap of his duffel bag and ignored the whispers. The sun had barely risen over the glass towers behind the training complex, casting long shadows across the open ground. Everything about this place screamed power, clean lines, steel gates, disciplined movement. It was the kind of place where only the best survived. And Rafiq knew exactly what they saw when they looked at him. A man in his early 30s, slightly leaner than the rest, wearing a faded shirt that had seen too many washes. Not the kind of man you'd expect at a high-profile CEO Bodyguard Tryout. But they didn't see the nights he stayed awake listening for danger. They didn't see the way his hands moved without hesitation when something went wrong. They didn't see the quiet storms he had already survived. They saw a single dad. They saw weakness. And they were wrong. Rafiq's life had not always looked like this. There was a time when his world was smaller but whole, when mornings began with laughter instead of urgency. His daughter, Meher, had been the center of everything. She had a way of turning even the hardest days into something softer. Her small hand in his, her endless questions, her stubborn belief that her father could fix anything. But life had a way of tearing things apart without warning. When her mother left, it didn't come with shouting or drama. Just silence. Just absence. Just a note that explained nothing and answered even less. From that moment on, it was just the two of them. And Rafiq had learned quickly that being both father and protector meant becoming someone stronger than he ever thought he could be. He took jobs others wouldn't. Night shifts, security details, anything that paid enough to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. But deep down, he knew he needed something more stable, something that could secure Meher's future. That's when he heard about the tryouts. A private firm was recruiting elite bodyguards for a powerful CEO whose name alone carried weight across industries. The pay was more than Rafiq had ever imagined earning. The kind of money that could change everything. But the competition? It was ruthless. The whistle blew, snapping him back to the present. Candidates were being lined up for the first round, physical assessment. The instructors walked along the rows, their eyes sharp, scanning for weakness. Rafiq stood still, steadying his breath. He didn't belong here, not in the way the others did. They had polished resumes, training in elite academies, bodies built for intimidation. He had experience no one could measure on paper. And he had something else. Purpose. The first tests were simple but brutal. Sprints, endurance runs, obstacle courses that demanded both speed and precision. The sun climbed higher, heat pressing down relentlessly. One by one, candidates began to falter. Muscles cramped, breaths grew ragged, confidence cracked. But Rafiq kept going. Not the fastest, not the strongest, but consistent. Focused. Unyielding. Still, the mocking didn't stop. Every time he passed a station, someone had something to say. A laugh. A muttered comment. A shake of the head. It wasn't loud enough to be called out, but it was constant enough to wear anyone down. Anyone except him. Because Rafiq had learned long ago that noise didn't matter. Survival did. By midday, the field had thinned. Only a handful of candidates remained. Among them was a man named Cale Verdon, a giant of a person, broad-shouldered and imposing, with a reputation that seemed to precede him. People spoke his name with a mix of admiration and caution. Former professional fighter, they said. Undefeated in underground circuits. A man built for dominance. Kale had been one of the loudest voices earlier. And now, he was watching Rafiq with a different kind of interest. The next round was announced, combat evaluation. A ripple of excitement moved through the remaining candidates. This was where reputations were made, or destroyed. Pairs would be assigned randomly, and each would engage in controlled sparring under the watchful eyes of the instructors. Rafiq rolled his shoulders, feeling the familiar tension settle in. This was his ground. Not the flashy kind of fighting people cheered for, but the real kind. The kind that ended quickly, decisively. The kind where hesitation meant loss. Names were called. Pairs were formed. And then it happened. Rafiq Haleem. Kale Verdun. The murmurs returned, louder this time. Some laughed outright. It wasn't subtle anymore. This was entertainment for them. A mismatch. A spectacle. The underdog being fed to the beast. Rafiq stepped forward anyway. Across from him, Kale cracked his knuckles, a grin spreading across his face. There was confidence there, but also something else, curiosity. Maybe he was wondering how quickly this would end. The instructor raised a hand. Begin. For a split second, everything went still. Then Kale moved. Fast. Aggressive. Exactly as expected. But what happened next, no one expected. Rafiq didn't retreat. He didn't panic. He stepped in. There was a sharp shift in the air, something almost invisible but undeniable. In that moment, Rafiq stopped being the man they had mocked. He became something else entirely. Focused. Precise. Dangerous. Kale's first strike was powerful, aimed to overwhelm. But Rafiq read it before it landed. A slight shift of weight, a turn of the shoulder, and he was already moving. Not away, but through. Time seemed to slow. Rafiq's movements were clean, efficient. No wasted energy. No hesitation. He closed the distance in a way that caught Kale off guard, redirecting the momentum with a technique that came from experience, not showmanship. A pivot. A lock. A controlled drop. And in seconds, Kale was on the ground. The impact echoed across the field. Silence followed. Not the quiet of disinterest, but the stunned, breathless kind. The kind that happens when reality refuses to match expectation. Kale didn't get up immediately. Not because he couldn't, but because he was processing what had just happened. The strongest man there, taken down before he could even adjust. Rafiq stepped back, giving space. His chest rose and fell steadily, but his expression remained calm. This wasn't victory for him. It was confirmation. The instructors exchanged glances. Something had shifted in their evaluation. And the others? They weren't laughing anymore. From that moment on, everything changed. The mocking stopped. The whispers turned into quiet observations. People began to watch Rafiq differently, not as a joke, but as a contender. Every movement he made carried weight now. Every action was studied. But for Rafiq, nothing had really changed at all. Because his reason for being there had never been about proving them wrong. It was about proving something to himself. And to the little girl waiting at home. The final round came as the sun began to dip, casting golden light across the field. Only 3 candidates remained. The test was simple in concept, but brutal in execution, a simulated protection scenario. Each candidate would be assigned a client and faced with unpredictable threats. Judgment, reaction time, and composure would be everything. Rafiq was the last to go. As he stepped into position, he closed his eyes for a brief moment. Not to block out the world, but to center himself within it. He thought of Meher. Of her laughter. Of the way she looked at him like he was already everything he needed to be. Then he opened his eyes. And the test began. What followed was not flashy. It wasn't dramatic in the way people expected. But it was flawless. Every movement had purpose. Every decision was calculated. He anticipated threats before they fully formed, positioned himself with instinctive precision, and maintained a level of calm that others couldn't replicate. It wasn't just skill. It was experience shaped by necessity. When it ended, there was no doubt left. Rafiq Haleem had outperformed them all. The decision was announced shortly after. The lead instructor stepped forward, his voice steady but carrying a note of respect that hadn't been there before. The position goes to Rafiq Haleem. No applause. Just something deeper. Recognition. Kale approached him afterward, no trace of arrogance left in his expression. There was respect there now. Real, earned respect. He extended a hand, and Rafiq accepted it without hesitation. Because this was never about rivalry. It was about understanding. That strength isn't always loud. That resilience doesn't always look impressive. And that sometimes, the most underestimated person in the room is the one who has already survived the hardest battles. As Rafiq left the training ground that evening, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple, he felt something shift inside him. Not pride. Not relief. Something quieter. Hope. When he reached home, Meher ran to the door, her small arms wrapping around him with a force that made everything else fade away. He lifted her effortlessly, holding her close as she asked 100 questions at once, her excitement overflowing. And for the first time in a long while, Rafiq allowed himself to smile without weight behind it. Because he had done it. Not for them. Not for recognition. But for her. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like, comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. You never know who might be fighting a silent battle, waiting for their moment to rise. And before we end, tell us in the comments, have you ever been underestimated, and proved everyone wrong? Because stories like these aren't just stories. They're reminders. That strength comes in many forms. And sometimes, the quietest ones, are the strongest of all.